On January 29, 2002, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, delivered an address to the country, with Iraq as the main topic. In particular, President George W. Bush proclaimed, "Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility to America and its support for terror. Such states and their terrorist allies form an axis of evil that is arming itself to threaten world peace. In their pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a very serious and ever-growing danger. They can provide these weapons to terrorists, attack our allies, or try to blackmail the United States of America. In any of these cases, the price of indifference would be simply catastrophic. We know the price of freedom, we have shown our power of freedom before, and in this great conflict, my fellow Americans, we will see the victory of freedom." Hello, friends, my name is Vladlen Mariev and you are on the History Without Myths channel, where we tell the story of the past of Ukraine and the world without embellishment or falsification. Subscribe to History Without Myths and click the bell to not miss new videos. Long live Ukrainian YouTube! Having liberated Kuwait from the Iraqi occupation in 1991, the Allies did not achieve all the goals of the military campaign. In particular, Saddam Hussein's regime remained unshaken. Moreover, having total control over his country's media, he was even able to elevate the cult of the leader to a new level. Saddam did not lower the level of his anti-imperialist rhetoric, and he criticized not only Western countries but also a number of Arab states. First of all, Iraq accused Saudi Arabia of betrayal. For American politicians, regime change in Iraq has become a real obsession. At that time, America suddenly found itself in a vacuum of enemies. The USSR and the entire Warsaw Pact had collapsed. At the time, it seemed that a weak Russia would never take the place of the main possible enemy. China was still far from its current power, and North Korea did not yet have long-range ballistic missiles or conduct nuclear tests. Islamist Iran, exhausted by the long war with Iraq and international sanctions, did not look like a worthy opponent either. Strangely enough, the absence of a real external threat can be a destabilizing factor for a superpower, as pacifist sentiments are rapidly growing in society. More and more people are asking the question, is it worth continuing to invest so much in an extremely expensive military machine? Maybe the state will finally start spending money on something more useful for its citizens? Usually, in such periods, left-wing forces and newly minted populists come to the fore. They launch a massive campaign against arms manufacturers. It is said that these bad guys do not want to lose their super profits and are using all their influence to prevent cuts in the defense budget. But the reality is not so simple. Let's focus on just two aspects. Conversion of high-tech production of modern weapons is a long and expensive process. Therefore, it is often easier for business owners to cut jobs or even liquidate the company if they lose military contracts than to try to produce washing machines instead of tanks. Thus, tens of thousands of people may find themselves out of work. The state will have to spend money on social benefits. And they can spend all the money saved by cutting the defense budget. It is also important to preserve the scientific and technical potential of the defense sector, because no one knows what challenges lie ahead. So, having a worthy enemy is even useful, because it is a stimulating factor, and Saddam Hussein was the best candidate for this role. In addition, in the event of a regime change, Iraqi oil could be a nice bonus. The pressure on Iraq began immediately after the victorious Desert Storm. International economic sanctions continued to be in effect. The United States and the United Kingdom established no-fly zones over Iraqi Kurdistan in the north of the country and the predominantly Shiite-populated areas in the south. International inspectors arrived in the country to monitor Iraq's compliance with the United Nations resolution on the destruction of weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein tried to resist, either by expelling the inspectors or by ordering the shelling of military aircraft in the forbidden zones controlled by the Allies. In response, he received painful blows, such as the Desert Fox air operation, conducted in December 1998, a month before the United States of America passed the Iraq Liberation Act. The main emphasis was placed on supporting the Democratic opposition, for which $97 million were allocated. After the elections of 2000, instead of the Democrats with President Bill Clinton, the Republicans, led by George W. Bush, came to power in Washington. For him, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein was something of a family affair, inherited from his father. Plans began to be developed, but there was no rush to start a new war. Everything changed after September 11, 2001. A terrorist attack unprecedented in world history, with civilian casualties unprecedented in the United States, radicalized both society and the state. The quick victory in Afghanistan did not satisfy the thirst for revenge, and international terrorism took the place of the main enemy, with centers of its influence being sought all over the planet. The White House quickly lumped Saddam Hussein in with al-Qaeda, Iranian Islamists, North Korean communists, and other scary Westerners. On September 12, 2002, George W. Bush, in a speech to the United Nations Security Council, made a host of accusations against Iraq, ranging from human rights violations to intentions to develop its own nuclear weapons. Today, Iraq continues to conceal important information about its nuclear program: weapons design, procurement logs, experimental data, nuclear material accounting, and documentation on foreign assistance. Iraq has capable nuclear scientists and technicians, and it retains the physical infrastructure necessary to build nuclear weapons. Iraq has made several attempts to acquire high-strength aluminum tubes used to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. If Iraq acquires the fissile material, it could build a nuclear weapon within 1 year. However, a report by Major General Glenn Schaefer noted that the United States' knowledge of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program ranged from virtually zero to about 75%. The data on nuclear weapons was particularly weak. Our assessments are largely based on analytical assumptions and judgment rather than on hard evidence. The evidence base is particularly scant for Iraq's nuclear programs. The British government, led by Tony Blair, also found no evidence that Iraq possessed any weapons of mass destruction. However, it fully supported the George W. Bush administration in its efforts to finally resolve the issue of Saddam Hussein. Among the other members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, only Poland agreed to send its military. Australia also decided to join the operation directly, and the Kurdish militia became an important ally. Peshmerga. On November 8, 2002, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1441, which demanded that Iraq fulfill all its disarmament obligations and return international inspectors to the country. Although it contained tough language, such as giving Iraq one last opportunity to fulfill its disarmament obligations, it did not authorize the use of force. The usually obstinate Saddam this time, within 3 days, agreed to comply with the Security Council's demands, and soon the inspectors returned to Iraq, searching for weapons of mass destruction, that their efforts proved futile. The United States continued to push the Security Council for more radical solutions. On February 5, 2003, Colin Powell, one of the heroes of Desert Storm, addressed a special meeting of the Security Council. He tried to convince them that Iraq had ties to al-Qaeda and was developing horrific weapons, including bacteriological ones. To be more convincing, the ex-general even decided to wave a test tube with alleged anthrax spores in front of the Security Council members. Wasn't it from him that the Russians borrowed this idea and accused us of having secret biolabs? Neither Colin Powell's eloquence nor his visual aid made the proper impression. Even France did not support the forceful resolution, and Russia was not to be spoken of. And these days, the Russian occupiers are committing massive crimes against the civilian population. They are carrying out terrorist attacks on energy infrastructure, trying to occupy our territories. We urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine by all possible means, including through trusted volunteer foundations and organizations, the details of which are posted in the description of this video. Later it became known that Colin Powell's presentation included information provided by a certain Rafid al-Janabi, an Iraqi emigrant living in Germany. At the same time, the Americans ignored the warnings of the German and British intelligence services about the unreliability of this source. A few years later, al-Janabi himself said that his information was false. So, the new coalition failed to get the United Nations to legitimize the invasion of Iraq, unlike in 1991, but the process was unstoppable. George W. Bush received authorization from the U.S. Congress to use any means necessary against Iraq in October of 2002. Tony Blair's government received a similar decision from the House of Commons on March 18, 2003. Kuwait became the main foothold, with limited forces in other countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar. In total, the Western Allies concentrated about 200,000 personnel, of which almost 150,000 were part of the American contingent and 45,000 were part of the British contingent. Australia sent 2,000 and Poland only 194 special forces. Turkey did not allow the use of its territory for the invasion, and the US had to rely mainly on the Kurdish Peshmerga, which could deploy up to 70,000 fighters, to act in the north. In addition, the United States landed several thousand of its paratroopers there from the air. The coalition's aviation grouping consisted of more than 700 combat aircraft alone, the vast majority of which were American, including strategic bombers B-52H, deployed to the British Fairford airfield. And the stealth planes B-2A operated from their home base of Whiteman, Missouri and from Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean. At sea, the United States also dominated, providing 115 warships and vessels. Among them were 3 multi-purpose aircraft carriers, Abraham Lincoln, Constellation, and Kitty Hawk. The Royal Navy was represented by less than 10 warships, including the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. The Allies believed that after the defeat of 1991, the Iraqi army could not fully recover. Nevertheless, it was a serious force. Up to 375,000 personnel were in service, and with the Republican Guard, paramilitary units, the Fedayeen movement, and the Mobilization Reserve, the number could have increased to 1 million. Theoretically, Iraq could have fielded nearly 5,000 pieces of armored vehicles, but it is unlikely that the entire armada was in satisfactory technical condition. The same was true of the nearly 700 airplanes and helicopters of many types and purposes. The Allied operation was called Iraqi Freedom, with propaganda overtones, and the command was entrusted to an experienced 4-star American general, Tommy Franks, who had experience in the recent victory over the Taliban in Afghanistan. According to him, the number one objective of the war in Iraq was to end the regime of Saddam Hussein. In addition, it was supposed to find and destroy Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, destroy or expel terrorists from the country, collect multifaceted intelligence on global terrorist networks, solve urgent humanitarian problems of the local community, and protect Iraq's oil resources. And finally, to help the Iraqi people create the conditions for a transition to representative government. As we can see, from the very beginning, the Allies put the fate of Iraq in the last place. This low priority soon had negative consequences for both the local population and the coalition members themselves. The invasion began with a special operation on the night of March 17, 2003. Helicopters from Chinook landed 60 elite British Special Air Service soldiers with their combat buggies near the water treatment plant in the city of Al-Qaim. Intelligence believed it was a secret chemical munitions depot. Despite their legendary reputation, the special forces failed to capture the facility by surprise. A battle ensued, and eventually the resistance of the defenders was overcome with the help of aviation. No traces of chemical weapons were found. The attempt to physically eliminate Saddam Hussein, along with his inner circle, which included his sons Uday and Qusay, was completely unsuccessful. At dawn on March 19, a pair of stealthy fighter bombers F-117 Nighthawk dropped 4 precision bombs on the so-called Dora farm, on the outskirts of Baghdad. It was believed that Saddam Hussein and his family were hiding there, but the intelligence was wrong again, and he had not visited the place for several years. The pilots also did not perform well. None of the bombs hit their targets, and 1 civilian was killed and 14 injured in close explosions. At 21 o'clock on the same day, the Allies launched a series of powerful missile and airstrikes. The first targets were purely military installations. Early in the morning of March 20, bombs and missiles shook Baghdad, Mosul, and other cities. In contrast to Desert Storm, the Allies abandoned a lengthy air campaign. The large-scale ground invasion began virtually in parallel with the air bombing. Apparently, this decision was based on the experience of the war in Kuwait, so that the Iraqis would not have time to destroy their oil industry. Paratroopers and special forces proved to be the best in this area. They conducted a number of special operations and captured important facilities before the main forces arrived. Iraqi propaganda presented the war as a patriotic war against the forces of world evil. Thus, in his address to the nation, Saddam Hussein proclaimed, "We have the right to win, and Allah will give us victory, so take up your swords and attack the enemy. Those who call for evil in this world, you overestimate your capabilities. Do you call this a fair fight? But this is a disgrace, a crime against humanity. We call on behalf of the people of Iraq, our country's command and all of humanity to stop. We will defeat our enemy and they will have no hope, they have gone too far in injustice and evil. And we love the whole world, and Iraq will win, and all of humanity will win together with Iraq, and evil will be defeated by its own weapons. The American Zionist alliance against humanity will fail." Indeed, a significant number of Iraqis perceived the invasion as an unprovoked enemy invasion, and they were ready to defend their homeland. In addition, despite all the horrors of his authoritarian regime, Saddam remained quite popular in the country. After more than 20 years of rule, people got used to him. People were afraid that things would get worse without a strong leader. Undoubtedly, the mass media worked diligently to create the mood Hussein needed, and the local mentality also played an important role. As a result, the Allies faced significantly greater resistance than 12 years earlier. The first major battle took place for the city of Nasiriyah. It was of strategic importance as a transportation hub. Talil airfield was located nearby, and important roads with bridges over the Euphrates passed through or near the city. It was these bridges and the airfield that were the main targets for the American and British forces. It all started badly for the Americans. On the morning of March 23, a convoy of 18 vehicles got lost and fell into an improvised ambush. As a result, the Iraqis destroyed 15 vehicles, killed 11 people, and captured 6. Despite military censorship, Western media quickly learned about the incident. Of particular concern were the fates of the 3 captured female soldiers, one of whom, Lori Piestua, died shortly afterward from her wounds, while Jessica Lynch and Shoshana Johnson were also injured and taken to different Iraqi hospitals. To get them out, the Americans conducted 2 special operations. The morning's success did not help the Iraqis much. Soon after, U.S. Marines, supported by Al-1 Cobra attack helicopters, seized 2 bridges over the Euphrates, and then took control of Talil airfield. The main Allied forces moved on, bypassing the city, but the defenders of Nasiriyah did not lay down their arms and the fighting for it continued until March 27. Then for another week the Allies cleared the city, encountering sporadic resistance. Several days of fighting also took place for Najaf, Kerbala, and Basra, but in general, the invasion forces were steadily advancing, albeit a little slower than planned. On April 3, the Allies approached the outskirts of Baghdad. In addition to army units, the capital was defended by Hussein's personal guard, the Republican Guard, Fedayeen units, and other volunteer formations, totaling up to 36,000 personnel. They had well-equipped positions with reinforced concrete bunkers. General Franks didn't even plan to capture the city right away. He was supposed to surround it, find a weak spot in the defense, and make his way to the center. And so it happened. On April 5, a task force of the 3rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, which had almost 36 Abrams tanks, captured Baghdad International Airport, and the next day other units of the same military formation broke through to the city center and, after a fierce battle, occupied one of Saddam's palaces. A few hours later, Iraqi television broadcast an appeal from the coalition command to those who still continued to resist, offering to surrender under the threat of devastating bombardment. There was no longer any overall command of the defense. Saddam and his government disappeared, but for 3 more days the city was still fighting, sometimes very fiercely. The war caught journalists from many well-known media outlets in Baghdad. Most of them were staying at the Palestine Hotel, including the Ukrainian, Reuters cameraman Taras Protsuk. On April 8, a shell from an Abrams missile hit the room on the 15th floor, killing Taras and his Spanish colleague José Cuso, and wounding 2 others. The American command admitted that the shot was intentional. According to one version, the crew saw a sun glint from the camera lens and mistook it for a reflection from the scope. The tankers did not hesitate for long and decided to immediately fire in that direction. The war did not stop after the fall of Baghdad. On April 15, U.S. troops took control of Tikrit, the last major center of resistance, but it took almost 2 more weeks to fully occupy Iraq. On May 1, President Bush made a spectacular appearance on the deck of the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, which was stationed near San Diego. His predecessors had used a helicopter in similar cases, but Bush chose an anti-submarine plane S-3 Viking from which he got out in full flight gear. On the deck of the ship, Bush delivered one of his most famous speeches, which the media dubbed, "Mission Accomplished." In particular, he said, "The liberation of Iraq is a decisive step in the fight against terror. We have eliminated an al-Qaeda ally and cut off the source of terrorist funding. And it is certain that no terrorist network will receive weapons of mass destruction from the Iraqi regime, because the regime no longer exists." There really was no regime. Saddam and his most loyal associates did not poke their noses out of their hiding places. Some Iraqis sincerely rejoiced at the overthrow of the dictatorship. They believed that very soon their country would become a flourishing Western-style democracy. However, they were very quickly disappointed. First, Iraq was engulfed in chaos, a wave of looting and arbitrariness. Then Saddam's supporters began guerrilla operations against the Allies. Then came the Civil War and a series of American operations against various groups. And when it finally seemed that the long-awaited peace had come to the country, a new disaster appeared, the Islamic State. And war broke out again. Dear friends, please support the armed forces of Ukraine. Don't forget to subscribe to History Without Myths, click the bell, like and comment on this issue. Thank you for watching. Glory to Ukraine.